Welcome everyone to FCCPR sponsored Gubernatorial Forum for the 3 announced Democratic candidates who seek to defeat Republican Governor Charlie Baker in 2018. Thank you, candidates Jay Gonzalez, Bob Massey, and Seti Warren for agreeing to speak to our communities this afternoon. My name is Mary Ellen Calderwood, and I am a member of the Coordinating Committee for FCCPR. In July 2016, presidential candidate Bernie Sanders said, "Together, my friends, we have begun a political revolution to transform America, and that revolution, our revolution, continues." FCCPR, or Franklin County Continuing the Political Revolution, evolved from a grassroots effort to elect Senator Bernie Sanders as president in 2016. Since the 2016 election, FCCPR has grown into a nearly 350 dues-paying members who convene monthly during our General Assembly, when all members are provided with updates from our 7 task forces: campaign finance, civil rights, climate change, education, labor, and single-payer health care. These task forces meet on a regular basis at our member-supported office at 345 Main Street in Greenfield, just below Greenfield Coffee. They tackle issues ranging anywhere from global warming to attacks against unions. Incidentally, they participated in the development of the questions that will be presented by our moderator this afternoon. In addition, we have an 11-member coordinating committee who work together on supporting our task forces, recruiting new members, researching and providing critical information, and most importantly, encouraging our members to raise their voices on issues that concern them. FCCPR also partners with other area progressive movements to either support or oppose proposed or pending legislation, to mobilize in times of crisis and during elections. Lastly, our endorsement committee meets and makes recommendations to our membership on local, state, and soon-to-be federal elections. Of note, during our recent Greenfield municipal election, FCCPR was successful in electing 5 of our 6 endorsed candidates for local offices. I will offer more information on our endorsement process at the close of the forum. But now I want to introduce our 2nd Berkshire District Representative, Paul Mark. Paul represents Greenfield and was the first elected official in the Commonwealth to endorse Sanders and served as co-chair of the campaign in Massachusetts. Paul Mark.
Thank you. Thank you, Mary Ellen, and thank you to FCCPR and the various Democratic town committees in the region for putting this event on. This is important. This is democracy. This is what democracy looks like, and this is how we make democracy work, by participating in it. I want to say I admire each of these 3 men that are willing to challenge Charlie Baker. I admire them both individually and collectively. There you go. I'm not going to say who I admire most, but I admire them all. You have a gentleman who has served his city as mayor and served his country in the Navy. You have a gentleman who has dedicated his life to fighting for the environment and should be commended for his work ending the apartheid movement in South Africa. And you have a gentleman who did an outstanding job as a cabinet secretary under Governor Deval Patrick, and we were lucky to work with. But I admire them even more because they have the courage to do this, to put themselves and their necks and their families out on the line and challenge a governor that by all means seems to be unbeatable. He's supposedly unbeatable. He's got all this dark money. He's going to have $20 to $30 million and he raises it using loopholes, bringing in $40,000 per person from all over the country. And he's not afraid to spend it, and he's not afraid to work with super PACs who aren't afraid to spend it and attack them and Democrats all over the state. He's popular. He's so popular. My Democratic colleagues, some of them can't stop themselves. They can't help getting in pictures with him because he's so wonderful. But it's easy to be popular when nobody knows what you stand for. When you've never taken a position on anything for the 3 years that you've been governor. And so I admire that these three men are going to challenge him. They're going to challenge him to defend what he's been doing. They're going to make him declare, what is your accomplishment 3 years into this? And they're going to tell us why they're going to do a better job. When Governor Baker first took over, one of his first actions was to rescind a contract that was awarded for $2 million to the town of Heath. One of his next actions was to impose a moratorium on the Mass Broadband Institute project that cost us over a year. I still don't have internet in my town of Peru. Then he vetoed the funding for the opioid task force that Senator Rosenberg and I secured for Franklin County, one of the most successful programs in the state, a model throughout the Commonwealth and throughout the country. Things like that are why he needs to go. The Republican governor appoints Republicans to all the positions, patronage positions that end up with people getting fired in Department of Energy, and Department of Environment, Department of Conservation and Recreation. People that run for office as Republicans and they lose, the voters rejected them, but Governor Baker appoints them right into state government jobs, making more than me. Making a lot more than me. It matters who's governor. It matters who's governor because that person controls the executive branch. They control how they enforce the laws we pass. They can stifle laws that we're trying to pass. And they can be a roadblock for so many things that are important to us and to our values that we share. So what I'm going to ask you to do today is to listen to each of these three men. Listen to who they are. What is their background? Where do they come from? What have they been able to accomplish? Then next important, what is their vision? What do they want to accomplish? And do they share a vision with you, with all of us, collectively? And then also important, not most important, but important, can they win? And are you willing to do what it takes to help them win? Because if I had $1 for every person that told me, you know, I'd vote for Bernie Sanders, but he can't win, I'd be rich. But if every one person that said that voted for him, he'd be the president right now. So, bear that in mind. Get ready to work, get ready to be excited, and get ready to listen. Thank you again for being here. Thank you for having me. Welcome, and let's get out there and let's win this election in 2018, because we've seen what can happen right here in Greenfield. When Democrats and progressives and people of similar values work together, we can overcome anything, and we're not going to sit back and watch while Republicans walk all over us anymore. Thank you.
Definitely check mark. And now I want to introduce our moderator and one of FCCPR's endorsement successes, our own Sheila Gilmore. She's a member of our coordinating committee and our newly elected Precinct 6 Greenfield City Council member, Sheila Gilmore. She's going to moderate.
Thank you, Mary Ellen and Paul. My name is Sheila Gilmore, and I have the distinct honor of moderating today's forum. This afternoon, we will hear from all three of the declared Democratic candidates for governor, Jay Gonzalez, Bob Massey, and Seti Warren. If you're interested in posing a question to the candidates, you may do so by writing your question concisely and legibly on one of the note cards provided. If you do not have a note card, please raise your hand, and one of our volunteers will bring you one. You have until the end of opening statements to turn your question into one of our volunteers. We begin our forum with opening statements. Each candidate will have 5 minutes to make his case. Susan Triolo will be keeping time, and she will hold up a card to remind each candidate when he has 30 seconds remaining, and again when he has 10 seconds remaining. Next, I will pose 5 questions that were prepared by FCCPR and sent to each of the candidates in advance. Candidates will have 3 minutes to respond to each of these questions. The speaking order will change throughout the event, so our candidates will answer in a different order each time. After that, I will read several questions submitted by the audience. Our volunteers will look for questions that complement but do not repeat the questions already posed by FCCPR. And again, I would like to emphasize that if you would like to submit a question, you must do so by the end of opening statements. Finally, each candidate will have 2 minutes to address the audience one last time in closing remarks. We ask the audience to please hold your applause until the end of closing remarks. So without any further ado, I would like to welcome our candidates to Franklin County and the City of Greenfield. And now we're going to start with opening remarks by Mr. Bob Massey.
Thank you very much, Sheila. Thank you, Mary Ellen. Thank you, Susan. Thank you to all of you for coming out on this balmy weather and making it here to be part of our democratic process. I am running because I believe I am the strongest, boldest progressive in this race. I am the only person up here who voted for Bernie Sanders. And I support the concept that we need a revolution in this country. We need system change because our economy is fundamentally upside down. The form of capitalism that we have today is not working for most people. Now, back in 1944, when Franklin Roosevelt was president and we were still in the middle of World War II, he gave a brilliant State of the Union address where he said that we've come a long way with our political Bill of Rights. Now we need an economic Bill of Rights because we cannot be free as a people unless each of us has access to 4 building blocks of prosperity: a good home, a good school, a good doctor, and a good job. Now, all 4 of these things are becoming harder and harder for regular people to afford and to achieve. And we have watched as the gap between the wealthy and regular folks and low-income folks has gotten worse and worse and worse. And the whole idea of the American dream is now falling apart as people are losing confidence that through their hard work and their ability, they can advance in their own lives, and even more important, that their children and our young people will do even better. That is under threat, and that is exactly why so many people in desperation, in grief, in anger, pushed that big red Trump button back in 2016. If we are going to win the country back, if we are going to win voters back, we have to have a bold, strong vision. So let's go through that. A good home. We need to be fighting for affordable housing, changing methods of ownership, introducing new forms of finance. For schools, we know how hard it is now for communities to support public education, but we need to push forward, supporting the Fair Share Amendment, working for universal pre-K, reviewing our curricula so that people are ready for the 21st century economy, lowering the cost of higher education, first until we are debt-free, and finally so that we are tuition-free. In terms of doctor, I support single payer. I've been through plenty of medical challenges myself, and I'll talk a little bit more about why I'm deeply committed to that. But we need to move forward. We've tried everything else. We're wasting enormous amounts of money. We need to move to a rational system that guarantees health care for all. And then finally, we also need to be thinking about other issues like transportation, which is key to prosperity, and clean energy, which I know that we'll be talking about. Just to go back to the economy for a second, let me give you 7 quick ideas. We could be promoting local economy and local jobs. I used to be head of something called the New Economy Coalition, which focused on that. Worker and consumer cooperatives, procurement contracts with major anchor institutions so that we have our small business have a dependent source of revenue. We need to allow small investors to invest in each other's communities so that we have access to local capital. We need to design a system of portable benefits so that people are not hanging on to jobs that they hate and that they can't move because the only place they can get health insurance and other benefits is through their employer. We need to fight the way in which big corporations, I support small business, but big corporations are pushing to get people off their rolls, make them subcontractors, make them part-time, and that is damaging people across this state. Young people are now forced into the gig economy where they have to have 2 and 3 jobs to make ends meet. And finally, we need new structural changes like an infrastructure bank, which could lend money to improve infrastructure across the state. I just want to say, we are in a historic fight that has been fought other times in American history. George Washington was concerned about the moneyed interests. Abraham Lincoln was concerned about corporate power. Teddy Roosevelt, Franklin Roosevelt, even Dwight Eisenhower fought this battle. And we need to fight it again to preserve American economy and to preserve American democracy. And I just want to conclude by we should be proud that here in Massachusetts we carry forward the tradition of the Kennedys, because the Kennedys always framed politics not in terms of just getting what we want, but facing the deepest challenges of the day. And just to remember, Bobby Kennedy said, some people see things the way they are and ask why. I see things that never were and ask why not. That is the question for this campaign, and I hope that I will earn your support. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Messer. Excuse me, if we could please hold the applause until the end so that we can get through our forum, I would appreciate it. Thank you, and now Mr. Jay Gonzalez.
Hello, Franklin County. It's great to be back in Greenfield. This is the second time I've been here as a candidate. I came a number of times when I worked for Governor Patrick and authorized funding for important projects here, like the courthouse, Greenfield Community College, the Garden Theater renovation. So it's great to be back, and it's great to be here with all of you, a number of people who are committed to that core American value, and that is making progress. So my entire life, I've been surrounded by people who've proven our potential for progress. I worked for John Glenn, an American hero who literally reached for the stars and got there. I got to serve as a cabinet secretary for Governor Deval Patrick, and you all know his life story. It proves the American dream exists, and he never lost sight of all those continuing to reach for it. And there are many others in my life who've proven this point, but no one more than my parents. My mom is from Cleveland, Ohio. And during college, she went away on a foreign exchange program to Spain. 9 months later, she came back married to my 19-year-old Spanish father and pregnant with me. And I love telling that story to parents who have kids going on foreign exchange programs. They didn't have a lot. My mom had to drop out of college to take care of me. My dad didn't speak English, and he'd never been to college. But he worked his way from laying bricks in a city sewer system to becoming a successful small businessman and a proud American citizen. My mom went back to college when I was in high school and became a public school teacher and a member of the teachers union. Together they put all 3 sons through college, and this year, against all odds, they'll be celebrating their 48th wedding anniversary. Through that example and through the way they parented us, they always encouraged us to set high expectations for ourselves. And they instilled in us a belief that with hard work and a little help, reaching those expectations was actually possible. Now, those values aren't unique to me and my family. Those are our values, American values. And no one has reached higher, worked harder, and accomplished more together than the incredible people of Massachusetts. We started the Revolutionary War. We were the first to establish a public school and a public park, the first to recognize one's right to marry whoever you love, the first to make universal health insurance coverage a reality. And the list goes on and on and on. This is who we are. We have always been a leader, but we aren't leading right now, not under Governor Baker. I've been frustrated by how little our governor's accomplished, but I've been more frustrated by how little he's even tried. It is not good enough to simply accept the world the way it exists and try to manage it better. We need a governor who's going to see the way the world should be and take us to that place. Let's aim high. Let's be us. Let's give working families across the state a better deal, an economy that works for everybody, not just those at the top. How about a living wage, paid family leave, affordable housing, and higher education, and childcare, an issue I feel passionately about? How about this crazy idea? A transportation system across this entire state that people can actually depend on to get to work on time, right? Let's aim high when it comes to our dysfunctional healthcare system and implement a single-payer system that's simpler, cheaper, and will do a better job keeping people healthy. Let's aim high when it comes to other big challenges we face, like climate change, the biggest threat to our planet, and our broken criminal justice system, which is jailing way too many for way too long. And more important than any of that, let's aim high when it comes to how we treat people. Let's do it. Let's aim high. If we do, I know we can build a better future for everybody. That's the lesson my parents taught me. It's the American story. It's what the people of Massachusetts have proven over and over again. And it's what we should expect from our government and from ourselves. And that's why I'm running for governor. I'm not a career politician. I'm not going to make whatever political calculation I need to make just to win at whatever cost. That's not why I'm in this. I'm in this because I care about people, and I want to make a difference in people's lives. And if that's the type of candidate you want, if you believe we need to aim high, if you want Massachusetts to actually be a leader again, then I hope to earn your support, and I hope you will join our grassroots campaign. Thank you very much.
Excuse me, please hold applause till the end. Thank you, Mr. Warren.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. How's everyone doing? It is great to be with you. Congratulations on the progressives that won here. Give yourself a round of applause, and also give your rep a round of applause. Rep Mark, he's amazing. We're lucky to have you. Look, there are three things that drove me into this race for governor. My 9 years in the military, I enlisted a little bit after 9/11. I'm an Iraq War veteran, and during that year, I worked with people of all different backgrounds, races, religions, political persuasions. We had to work together to get through that year. The second is my 8 years as mayor of the city of Newton, working for the 88,000 people of my community every day. When I started running for mayor in 2009, my city had a $40 million structural deficit, no rainy day or reserve fund, two of the worst conditioned school buildings in the state of Massachusetts. I got to work. I worked, knocked on 11,000 doors, and I won that campaign by 469 votes. Good old-fashioned grassroots politics. Thank you. In the 8 years since I've been mayor, my last day was Monday. We've eliminated the $40 million structural deficit. We grew a rainy day fund that didn't exist to $20 million. We're building 5 new schools in the next 6 years, 3 of which are done. The next is being constructed now. We're rebuilding our fire stations, our sidewalks, and our roads, our infrastructure, and protecting public safety. And we have 2 AAA bond ratings in the city of Newton. I'm really proud of what we did to invest in the people of my community. And third, my family. I'm a dad, I'm a husband, 2 children, 9 and 6, and I know where I came from. You see, my dad grew up in a tough neighborhood in Harlem. It was deemed the worst block in America by CBS News at the time because of the drugs, gangs, and violence. He got out of that life by joining the military. He went to Korea, came home, met my mom. They went down south to college. Took them 6 years to finish, threw themselves in the civil rights movement. And my dad found Newton, Mass, because he was looking for higher ed. And he purchased the home where I grew up with my 2 sisters and where I live today, with my wife and 9-year-old and 6-year-old with GI Bill benefits. GI Bill benefits. This is a government-sponsored program, an investment for people of modest means so they can ensure their kids can do better than they did. That is not happening in the Commonwealth today, and it is wrong. It's bad economics, but there's a moral question attached to it, and I've asked everyone to ask themselves this question. What kind of Commonwealth do we want to be? What kind of Commonwealth do we want to be? Are we okay with people making choices between paying for a copay and going to the doctor or paying for the mortgage or rent? Are we okay with people making choices between paying for prescription drugs they need for themselves or their family members or putting food on the table? Are we okay with people being crushed by student debt, can't afford to attain the credentials they need to make ends meet in this economy? I do not believe this is okay. I believe we can do better. That's why I put forth 2 proposals, among many, when I announced for governor, one of which is putting in place a single-payer healthcare system in our state now so that people can access affordable healthcare. And the second is free public college lifelong, with paid internships and apprenticeships so that people can attain the credentials they need to make ends meet in this economy. I'll end with this. I know we're going to talk a lot about policy this afternoon, but I want to share a quick story with you. A young man stood up in a classroom at UMass Lowell and asked me a question. He said, "What's the biggest challenge that you see in this race coming up in 2018? I said, there are two things. One is accepting the status quo, and the second is the thinking that we can't do anything about it. I do not believe we should embrace the status quo, and I do not believe we should embrace the low expectations that Charlie Baker wants us to. And we can do something about it. We can change healthcare so it's affordable. We can change education so it's accessible. We can make sure we have housing and transportation that accommodates everyone across the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. We should not accept the status quo, and you showed you can do something about it by winning these elections over the last several weeks. We can do something about it in 2018. Thank you very much. I appreciate you having us today.
All right, thank you, gentlemen. Next, we're moving into the questions prepared by FCCPR, and as a reminder, we will have 3 minutes per person for answers. So our first question comes from our Education Task Force and goes to Mr. Gonzalez. If elected governor, would you ask your Commissioner of Education to implement a moratorium on standardized testing for 2 years as suggested in Senate Bill 308, to reject additional charter schools and implement an immediate adjustment to the funding mechanism for current charters, and to fully fund public education K through 16?
Let me start in answering this question by stating my mentality on this issue. I think the most fundamental responsibility we have collectively through our common instrument, government, is to make sure every single child in this state has access to a great public education. It is our number one priority and should be. In answering the question on the funding piece, fully funding Chapter 70 and local school districts, and I'll add in there the part about the charter school reimbursement, yes, we should fully fund it. The question talks about, should we be directing the commissioner to do that? The truth is, we need a governor who's going to provide the leadership we need to say we need additional revenue in state government in order to adequately fund public education across this state. And right now, we've got a governor who is not saying that. I am, I think my colleagues are as well. It's one of the reasons I support the millionaire's tax. It's going to be on the ballot in 2018 with the governor's race because it's going to generate meaningful new revenue we desperately need for education and for transportation. So yes, on fully funding. In terms of high-stakes testing, I do think we need a way to measure whether or not, we need to be measuring whether or not our kids are learning what we're teaching and whether we're doing a good job educating our kids and preparing them for success. I worry that we're testing too much. I also worry that the testing is happening and the focus on it is happening at the expense of a lot of other important things our kids need to be learning, and at the expense of other factors we should be considering in terms of their success and our schools' performance. Lastly, on charter schools, I absolutely think we should be telling the commissioner not to be approving any more charter schools, and essentially building a separate public school system from the one we have right now. We should not be creating a competitive system and a few more schools, even if you believed they were better, for a few more kids. It's a cop-out. We need a great public school system for every single child. We need the public schools that exist to have the resources and support they need to be successful for our kids. And so I would not support any further growth in charter schools. I think we need to be focusing resources on the schools we have that our kids depend on to get the education they need.
Thank you, Mr. Gonzalez. Next, we'll hear from Mr. Warren.
Thank you. Look, I'm a product of Newton Public Schools. I graduated from Newton North High School. Both of my kids go to Newton Public Schools. I believe strongly in public education. At the end of my tenure as your governor, if you give me that honor, I believe that we will see vast improvement in public education. I want to be known as the education governor here in Massachusetts. I believe very, very strongly, as a sitting member of my school committee for 8 years, that good education starts with great teachers. It also needs investment for those teachers, class sizes that are manageable, and buildings that are adequate for children to learn. Folks, we need to invest in public education. At this moment, the state of Massachusetts is not committed to ever educating every single child in every single district in this state. The formula needs to be redone. We need to make investment in our schools. This is why I was a strong no on question 2. I campaigned against it. We absolutely should not be adding additional charter schools. We know that the formula has been underfunded for many, many years. I want to talk about high-stake testing. I know, as many of you know, that high-stakes testing does not produce good educational outcomes. We know that. We need to move away from high-stakes testings in the state of Massachusetts. I will tell you, I do have concerns about putting a 2-year moratorium in place. At this, I would not support that. Lastly, I want to say, I want you to ask my teachers union in the city of Newton what kind of mayor I've been. I have been dedicated to education. Education is the bedrock of our community in Newton. Ask the parents, ask the teachers union. We work collaboratively to address the achievement gap, to address falling down buildings in the city that kids were learning in, and made vast improvements. I feel strongly I would do the same thing as governor of the state of Massachusetts. Thank you.
Thank you. And Mr. Massey, if you could please respond.
Yes, thank you very much. I think that I'm the only candidate up here who's actually been a teacher. I taught when I was much younger in the K through 8 school, and then I was a university professor for 7 or 8 years. So I think I bring that perspective of how important it is for an education to ignite people's minds and help them to grow as human beings. I, too, support the Fair Share Amendment. This is a critical step. We put about $7 billion into education at the state. About 4.5 of it comes to local communities. This would add almost an extra $1 billion. That's important, but it is not enough. And part of the problem is that that foundation budget that we heard about has been consistently underfunding communities, and in addition, burdening communities with transportation costs that we cannot afford. And then when we look at what's happening to local communities who also have to then pay for higher health care costs and all the other important elements of running a city, we see that education has consistently been squeezed. And so we have a fundamental decision to make, which is what kind of future do we want to design for our kids? I think that I don't believe we can eliminate all testing, because I agree that we need to have some mechanism for finding out how kids are doing and how schools are doing. But at the very moment when the global economy is rewarding people for creativity, for imagination, for collaboration, for cooperation schools, we're forcing our kids to spend hours drilling for these tests, and that's bad for teachers and that's bad for kids. I also think charter schools have become the bane of education in Massachusetts because they are stealing money from the public school system. And I'm particularly horrified that this governor has turned to his own appointees and cronies to fund the Question 2 campaign, for which they were fined hundreds of thousands of dollars for disobeying core campaign rules. And so that's a very deep problem. So finally, I just want to say that we need to look at these problems in an interconnected way. I think that's something I bring, is that I understand the interconnection of our systems and what a sustainability would look like when it comes to education. Let me give you a quick example. If we improve our affordable housing, then you actually improve child and maternal health. If you improve child and maternal health, then you improve performance in schools. And if you improve performance in schools, you create the likelihood of better achievement and jobs. I just want to say, I grew up with a disability. I would not be where I am today if I had not benefited from scholarships all the way through my life from very elite schools. But I want those opportunities to be spread across this state. That is the right of our children and something that a governor must fight for. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next question goes first to Mr. Warren. Single-payer health care has been part of the Massachusetts Democratic Party platform for a number of years, and yet the Medicare for All bill never makes it out of committee. What could you do as governor to ensure that the Medicare for All legislation is passed by the Senate legislature?
Well, as I said in my opening, I believe very strongly we need single-payer here or Medicare for All. Look, there's some good things about healthcare in the state of Massachusetts. We got about 98% of people that have some sort of insurance. We have some of the best innovations and doctors here. People come from all around the world. We want to retain those. The issue, we're the second most highest state as far as costs. This is why what I believe we cannot do is continue down the road we are on with Charlie Baker. And that is having some of the most vulnerable people shoulder those costs through copays, lowering deductibles, making it more expensive. This is a solution down in Washington, the Republicans down there, and Donald Trump. This is a solution with Charlie Baker. We need to reduce costs through reducing administrative costs and drug costs. This is where we should find the savings. I believe in direct engagement. I did 70 town halls as a mayor, as a chief executive when I first became mayor to get an override package passed. And I asked my residents to hold me accountable as well as the city councilors to improving public safety, education, and infrastructure. I would do the same thing if you elect me your governor. I would be here on the ground engaging you, and I'd ask for you all to hold us accountable. I understand this is complicated, and I understand it is hard. It is not going to be a scenario where you put a key in, you turn it, and all of a sudden, magically, it happens. This is going to be difficult, complicated work, but we need the political will in the governor's office to push this through, engage our residents, so we can do something about it. And I'll finally end. I've talked to a lot of people around the country about this issue, including the former governor of Vermont, Pete Shumlin, who I've been talking to and getting some advice. They were working on putting a single payer in place. It didn't work out. There are a lot of lessons we can learn from folks around the country. I think we have the best chance to do it right here in Massachusetts.
Thank you. And now Mr. Massey.
Thank you. I just want to say I've been thinking and working on this issue for more than 30 years. I'll give you some sense of why in a second. But the important thing here is that the ideal would be to move forward at the federal level. The idea of Medicare for All is correct, and we could do that by opening Medicare up steadily. But that's not going to happen under this president. So we need to explore methods, for example, opening up Medicaid, which is partially funded by the state, and offering benefits through Medicaid. We also have the opportunity to pull the folks together. This is something I would like to emphasize. My career has been bringing people together who do not agree and focusing them on a difficult goal, and then having the combination of diplomatic skills and forcefulness to make sure that we achieve this. Now, we have 10 nonprofit insurance companies. We have one for-profit insurance company. They are going to need to be brought in and then steadily pressured and invited to help solve this problem. Now, I just want to share with you why I am personally so passionate about this. Some of you have heard this story. I was born with a serious chronic illness, genetic illness called hemophilia that causes bleeding in your joints. I lost the ability to walk at the age of 4. I was in leg braces and a wheelchair through my whole childhood. And the reason I am now able to walk is because when I was 12 years old, my parents moved to France, and we discovered that their commitment to health care as a right meant that I would be covered under their system of single payer and national health insurance, which enabled me to get access to the expensive medical products that I needed to get back on my feet and get rid of those braces and get rid of the wheelchair. So I understand, I think, as well or better than anyone, how difficult and complicated a fight this is. But this commitment has been bred into my bones. I would not be standing anywhere if I were not, had not been, in many ways, liberated by a commitment to national health insurance and single payer. And just to finish up, this is one of the rights that Franklin Roosevelt talked about, not just because it's equal and it's fair and compassionate, because we need to be free as citizens. And one of the most crippling things is to have a serious illness or not have access to health care. And I've had conversations with people who simply do not know how they're going to pay for their rising premiums and their higher costs, here in Western Mass particularly. So I just want to say this, I think I have the experience and the skill and the determination to make this a reality, but I'll only be able to do it with your support today, in the election, and then afterwards. Thank you.
Thank you. And next we'll hear from Mr. Gonzalez.
So access to health care is a fundamental human right, in my view. Every single person should have access to the health care services they need to be as healthy as they can be. The system we have today does not give everybody access to the services they need. The system we have today is way too complicated for people to navigate. We've all experienced that in our personal lives. It is way too expensive. It is not financially sustainable over time. And the quality, honestly, isn't as good as it should be. We're great at the really high-end stuff. If you have a very sick child that needs to go to Boston Children's Hospital, we're just okay on the regular day-to-day care. We need to do better. We need to do better for people. I'm the only candidate in this race that has experience in the healthcare industry. When I worked in state government as Governor Patrick's Secretary of Administration and Finance, I was the chair of the board of the Health Connector and helped implement Massachusetts health reform successfully here. I did that for 3.5 years. When I left the Patrick administration, I was CEO of a health insurance company that covered low-income people in the Medicaid program here and in New Hampshire. And I saw firsthand, as CEO of this company, all the problems that we had, despite our best efforts, getting a lot of our low-income members access to the services they needed because it was Medicaid. So I know our system. I know all the different players in our system. And I will tell you, every additional second I spent working in our healthcare system, the more discouraged I got with how dysfunctional it is. I believe moving to a single-payer system is the best way to get to a simpler, cheaper, financially sustainable, better quality system. Let me give you one example of why I think we can cut out a lot of cost by moving to a single-payer system. At my health insurance company, I was very proud of a lot of the ways in which we helped our members access care. Most of what we did, though, was facilitate useless, valueless transactions. We had a whole team of people that would go out and contract with every doctor and hospital in the state, negotiating contracts, a whole team of people that get those contracts and put them in our IT systems so we would pay the bills correctly. We'd inevitably screw some of that up, so we had a whole team of people that would work to fix all the screw-ups. Every single health plan has all those teams of people. Every single hospital and doctor has teams of people to deal with all these teams of people. And there is a factoid out there that Toronto General Hospital has 4 billing people, Mass General has 450. I would not be surprised. This is wasteful. It's inefficient spending. We need to invest in providing people to access to the care they need. I think single payer is the best way there. We need to do it thoughtfully and carefully. We need leadership who understands the industry to do it. And I believe that I bring the experience and background to get us to a single payer system as quickly and as thoughtfully as we can.
Thank you. Our next question goes first to Mr. Massey. With the passage of laws like the 2008 Global Warming Solutions Act, Massachusetts became a leader in the nation by making a commitment to reduce climate change emissions by 80% by the year 2050. What specifically do you think we can realistically achieve by 2030? And if you become governor, would you embrace the goal of 100% renewable energy by 2050? And if so, how would you propose getting there?
Well, that is what you call in politics a softball question for me. Because for 25 years, I have worked steadily on climate change and on energy transition in this country. I was the first person to organize a major meeting on climate change at the Boston Museum of Science, attended by 300 leaders in April of 1992. And I have been working on it ever since. I have run climate change organizations. I ran a group called Ceres, which brought investors and activists together to push businesses to move forward. I founded something called the Investor Network on Climate Risk, which brought pension funds forward. Now, let's first identify why we are not making progress. We are not making progress because Governor Baker has put fossil fuel advocates into the positions of power, and they are advocating for and continuing our dependence on fossil fuel. The Department of Public Utilities is led by a woman who was formerly the chief lobbyist for fossil fuel energy companies. We have the system called ISO, which reinforces our commitment to fossil fuel. I have a plan right here called Bold Leadership for Climate, for Clean Renewable Energy, and I'm going to ask one of my friends and supporters here to pass it around. So yes, I know you're going to want to read it, but please pass it around. There are 22 specific suggestions that we can do, and let me mention 7 of them. We need to end utility control of the utilities, which we have today. We have to provide, we have to rearrange our incentives. We have to eliminate the caps on solar, which we have. We have to advance our commitment to wind energy. This governor has said we'll get there 10 years. I want to reverse all of those things. I want to move forward with a whole series of specific actions. The governor should be driving an electric car to encourage us. I have an electric car parked out in the driveway. It's been driving all over Massachusetts. And so I just want to suggest that this is something that is not only vital for the survival of the planet, and boy, if that isn't a reason to act, I don't know what is, but also it's the greatest economic opportunity in the history of Massachusetts. We could be generating, we are spending $20 billion bringing fossil fuel into the state. We could, at full build-out, be an exporter, not paying $20 billion, keeping that for our families, lowering our family energy bills, lowering the cost for small business, lowering the cost for municipalities, and actually, in addition, generating revenue for the state. It is crazy that we are falling so far behind the rest of the world. We need to stop that, and it's one of the reasons that I believe we can act, we must act, and this is the reason why I have been endorsed by Bill McKibben, who I helped build the fossil fuel divestment movement because I had been an expert on the South African divestment movement. This is an action we can take and we must take for our, not only for our current economic benefit, but to save the planet.
Thank you. All right, next, Mr. Warren, please.
Thank you. Look, you know, I'm 100% committed to the 2050 goal, the 100% renewables for sure. How do we get there? I look at what we've been able to do in the 8 years as mayor. I look at this question of climate change as not just in dealing with the issue of climate change itself, but as a social justice issue at the same time. Look, it is. So, a couple of things we did. I'm really proud of the fact that we cut our carbon footprint in half as a municipality since I've been mayor because of the work we've done on reducing energy consumption as well as solar. We shared some of that solar power from our municipal property to 900 of our lowest income residents in the city of Newton to give them an energy credit. This is a really first of its kind, innovative solution that I'm proud of. Newton has the second highest number of millionaires in the state. 1 in 8 in our residents live at or below the poverty level. This is a way to address economic inequality. If we scale programs like this up, we can create green jobs if we invest in offshore wind, if we invest in renewable energy technologies. We can actually provide a ladder for people that need it right here in the state. Lastly, if you looked at the news and you saw the flooding that occurred on the Cape and in Boston, if you don't need to see the evidence, I mean, if you need to see evidence, just look at what happened over the last few days as far as climate change. We need to invest in climate change resilience technologies as well as renewable energy. So what would I do? I would meet the targets, but I would make smart investments so that we can protect the Commonwealth, be a world leader, address economic inequality, and give a real foundation for everyone across the Commonwealth in every region, including this one.
Thank you. And Mr. Gonzalez?
Climate change is the biggest threat to our planet. We need leadership on this issue. I do agree with setting the ambitious goal of 100% reduction by 2050, if not sooner. I think some of what we need to do to get there is accelerate our transition to renewable energy sources. Our current governor's been slow walking that, thanks to the appointees he's made that Bob referenced. I think we need to stop all expansion of natural gas pipeline infrastructure that's just furthering our dependence on fossil fuels. I think if we can't get our surrounding states to join us in this, we should be the first state in the nation to adopt carbon pricing, which all economists agree will be an important incentive to accelerating our transition to renewable energy, to a clean energy economy. And I also think, to the point my colleagues mentioned, this is a huge opportunity for us. We could create thousands and thousands and thousands of jobs right here in Massachusetts if we're intentional about it. Governor Patrick used to say, we could make the world our customer in the clean energy sector. He's right. We could be the power plug for the world's green energy economy if we have leadership and are intentional about it. We have all the assets right here in Massachusetts, all the great academic institutions, including in this area, financial capacity, venture capital funding, and other assets to be the world's leader in creating jobs to support what is going to be one of the fastest growing industries in the world in the next couple of decades. We need leadership like we had from Governor Patrick on the Life Sciences Initiative, which I was participated in, was chair of that board of the Life Sciences Center for 6 years, where we played a role in facilitating the growth of an industry that has made us the world's leader in the life sciences industry. We should do the same thing in the clean energy sector. It's a huge opportunity for us. We need leadership that's going to recognize, we need to work with a sense of urgency to take on climate change and reduce emissions to get to a true clean energy economy, and who's going to make sure that we are the world's leader in creating jobs in this sector.
Thank you. And Mr. Gonzalez, while you're warmed up, we also have you on for our next question. The Globe Spotlight team recently reported that African Americans in Greater Boston have a median net worth of $8, while white residents have a median net worth of close to $250,000. How do you propose to deal with these gross inequities? And if massive economic incentives are accepted by companies like Gillette, Amazon, and others, how would you guarantee that living wages would be provided to new employees?
So if you haven't read the Globe Spotlight series on racism in Greater Boston area, you should do so. It was a very powerful series, very compelling, extremely disturbing, and eye-opening and troubling. We've got huge inequities across this entire state, and the whole reason I'm running for governor is to try to make a difference in getting rid of those inequities and helping people who aren't at the top to overcome some of the challenges that are holding them back, whether it's my proposals and trying to make childcare affordable and accessible to every single family in this state, or affordable housing, or affordable college, or you name it. Issues that are going to allow people who've been suffering from inequities and who've had challenges that are holding them back to get ahead. All those proposals will help disproportionately benefit the black population in the Greater Boston area, that it has $8 average wealth among them, lots of other communities of color, and lots of others in lower income and rural areas across this state. But this series suggests we need to do more than that. We need to have a specific, intentional focus on making sure the black community and communities of color across this state are getting the help they need. And there are two big picture ways in which the governor can do that, and which I would. One is using the tool of state government as an actor to ensure we're doing everything we can to provide opportunities to lift those communities up. When I was in state government working for Governor Patrick, I oversaw the Office of Access and Opportunity, where we did things like increase the percentage of contracting we did with minority and women-owned businesses. We funded efforts to train women and minority-owned businesses to understand how to win contracts with state government and be successful in winning business. We did things like funded the Mass Growth Capital Corporation to provide capital to businesses that are owned by minorities. So we did a number of different things. I think we can take it to the next level. I would like to explore what else we can do to provide a lot of opportunities. I think the example you noted in your question about if we're giving state subsidies, taxpayer subsidies to big corporations, which by the way, we wouldn't be doing in my administration to the level that's been happening right now under Governor Baker. But there should be strings attached in terms of expectations to help other communities. The other thing the governor should be doing is using the bully pulpit to start to try to change the culture that has tolerated what is intolerable, this inequity, and making sure the business community and other institutions across the state and leaders across the state are consciously working to try to close these gaps and lift these populations up. Thank you.
Thank you. And Mr. Warren?
One of the things in the Globe Spotlight series that they pointed out was the lack of African Americans in statewide political leadership. You can do something about that by electing me. I got some people with clipboards going around. Look, here's the way I see this. We've made a lot of progress. I've grown up here in Massachusetts in the Boston area. We've made a lot of progress, as we know. There's a long way to go. Many of us who read that article knew the disparities, understood them, but the data came alive in those, and I commend the Globe in those stories. Look, 4 places that I think we need to concentrate, and I've been sitting down with African Americans across the state listening. 4 areas that I've based my campaign on. The issue of economic inequality, I do believe, is the defining issue of our time. 1 is education. I talked to you a little earlier about free public college with apprenticeships and internships, making sure we have a public education system that includes summer enrichment and after-school enrichment in early childhood. Number 2, real investment in growing transportation and housing, affordable housing across this state. Number 3, we have to make sure we're growing higher paying jobs where people live. That includes investing in medium and small businesses with microloans, grants, and ensuring folks have the toolkit to grow their small business, and they have access to capital and social capital as well. And 4th, we saw disparities in our healthcare system, particularly with African Americans. We not only need to address the cost issue, but we also have to address the disparity issue of what kind of care is in place for African Americans and people of color. I believe some of these 4 pillars are unique to the black community and the disparities there, and including criminal justice issues. But I also believe there's some real universal themes here when you go across the state that include communities that are not specifically black, but that are white, in towns where we have huge disparities as far as income, access to good quality health care, education, and housing. But I do know that, and I've told, as I've listened to people in the African American community, what I'm going to do is be setting forth real metrics across the state, and I'm going to ask that you all and the black community hold me accountable to those metrics in a transparent way if I become your governor. Thank you.
Thank you. And Mr. Massey?
I didn't need to read the Boston Globe to find out about problems of economic justice. I've been working on economic justice for my entire career, and racial justice, and gender justice. And I can add regional justice to this. So we need to be thinking about the problem in a couple of different ways. One, obviously, we have a serious problem with wages. Productivity has been going up for 40 years, up to 80%. Wages have been flat. That means that companies that are gaining wealth are not putting it back in wages and in benefits, which is supposed to be the capitalism that we support. That's why I support the Raise Up agenda for the $15 minimum wage, paid family and medical leave. These are not radical ideas. They have been implemented long ago in other countries. So wages are critical, but an even deeper problem is the inequality of wealth. And wealth comes from ownership. When you own something, when you have equity in something. So to help close that wage gap, we have to make it easier for people across the state of all backgrounds, and especially communities of color, to have access to be able to buy a house, to be able to start and own a small business. And there are many, here's the good news, there are many ways to help people build equity. For one thing, I'm from Somerville. I've lived there for 33 years. In Somerville, the way working people used to build wealth was you could buy a triple-decker. You lived in the first floor, you put your mom in the second floor, and then you rented the third floor. Or you'd rent 2 apartments, and at the end of 25 years, you owned the whole building and you had built wealth. We made the transition now that most of those apartments are now condominiums. So you can't build wealth in that form. So there are many, many things that we can do here. I've talked about that the core problem is that capitalism in its current form is not working for us. And so we have to address that. We have to look at alternative forms of ownership. We have to look at, as I mentioned before, co-ops, land trusts, all kinds of mechanisms that allow for equity building. This has been addressed all over. And I just want to say, before I ran for governor, I ran a program at UMass Boston called the Sustainable Solutions Lab, and we came up with innovative ideas like all the spending that we're going to have to do to protect ourselves from climate change. You saw what happened in the flooding. That is going to get worse. But the danger is that money will be spent in ways that do not lift up lower income communities and communities of color. For 2.5 years, I brought communities together in the Boston region and eastern Massachusetts to focus on how that spending, which we are going to have to spend, is going to support, so that we hire people and we train people and we give people opportunity that flows from that. So we also, as I've mentioned, we have mechanisms to use our anchor institutions like hospitals, like universities, and so forth, to provide jobs through procurement. And we can also build a state infrastructure bank, which the red state of North Dakota has. And that would allow public money to turn into investments across the state. So I just want to say, this is a structural problem. We have to have structural solutions. That is what I have been working on for my entire life. I wrote an 800-page book on race in the United States and in South Africa. I was a leader of the South African divestment movement. I understand this nexus between race and economic justice, and I believe I could bring that experience and that commitment effectively to this state. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Massey. And FCCPR's final question goes first to Mr. Warren. Democrats greatly outnumber Republicans in Massachusetts, yet the state has mostly had Republican governors since 1980. Explain why you are the candidate who can best generate the enthusiasm needed to vastly increase Democratic and especially minority and youth turnout to elect a Democratic governor.
Look, simple answer to this is when we turn out, we win. When we stay home, we lose. What am I doing? I'm building a substantial grassroots campaign, organizing like heck on the ground and telling the truth. We can't be afraid to tell the truth about what needs to be done. $15 minimum wage, paid family leave, single payer. We have to, let's make sure we ask people who are making $1 million or more, $20,000 a week, to pay a little bit more in the fair share tax amendment, to reinvest those. Let's not be afraid to do that. And I learned this at a young age. Sitting in the back of a car with my dad who worked with Michael Dukakis, I heard about what it takes to build a grassroots campaign and tell the truth. I'm really proud to have Michael Dukakis' endorsement and Kitty Dukakis' endorsement in this campaign. I've talked to him plenty of times over the last few months, and he is the master of grassroots campaigning. So that's what we're going to do. We're going to work really hard at that. I'm really proud to have 2 veterans of the Deval Patrick campaigns, John Walsh working with me, who was Deval Patrick's campaign manager in 2006, and Nancy Stolberg, who ran Deval Patrick's field operation, is working with me. We are growing our campaign. We're doing it the right way. If we do this, we will win this campaign. We will get the turnout we need to beat Charlie Baker.
Thank you. And next to Mr. Gonzalez.
So the best way we can convince you is by demonstrating that we are doing it. And we have a lot of momentum right now in our campaign. And we're going about it the same way. I was the first candidate to get in this race. I've been running a grassroots campaign going all over this state for the last almost 1 year. Going to House parties and Democratic town committee meetings, going to every corner of this state, meeting with every type of population in this state, every constituency, and we are getting a very positive response. I'm looking at the front row, Dylan, who is from Irving, I think, right, and has been volunteering for my campaign. He's a senior in high school right now, and we've got lots of other high school kids we've engaged. The question asks about especially minority and youth. We've done a lot of outreach, and we're getting a lot of positive outcomes, and I'm feeling very optimistic based on the momentum we have. We've got, I think we're getting a very positive response to what we're offering, which is compared to a governor who's not only not making progress on issues that affect people on a day-to-day basis and isn't even trying, no agenda to do so, versus a candidate who has an ambitious, progressive agenda, desperately wanting to make a difference in people's lives, desperately wanting to stand up for every single person in this state, and the leadership experience in state government and in the private sector to deliver on it. And we're getting a very positive response. Senator Jamie Eldridge endorsed me recently. Out here, Representative John Syback, Representative Tricia Farley-Bouvier recently endorsed me. We're getting a lot of support across this state that we're very proud of, and that's what it's going to take to win. It's going to take making sure people understand the choice. Everyone says, Charlie Baker, he's so popular. You know, he's really nice, he's tall. You know, how are you going to beat him, right? Well, it's really easy to be popular, as Representative Mark said, if you don't do anything and you never take a stand and your whole approach to the job is being cautious instead of courageous. When people are asked, how do you feel about Charlie Baker? And the answer is, he's fine, right? Nobody's passionate about him. And you ask them why they like him. Well, he seems nice, and I'm really glad he isn't a crazy extremist Republican like exists in other parts of the country. Well, when did the measure whether or not our governor's doing a good job become that he's nice and isn't crazy? We need leadership, and I believe elections are about choices. And when there's a choice between Governor Baker, who's going to have no record of making any meaningful difference on any issue that affects people's lives in a positive way, versus someone who desperately wants to do so and has the leadership experience to deliver on it, we win. Particularly if people understand the choice. And that's where you all come in, and why building a real strong grassroots campaign and reaching out to all those communities matters, which is what we're doing, and we're getting a lot of momentum and support.
Thank you. And Mr. Massey?
I believe we win when we focus on the things that people care about and that they're experiencing in their daily lives. And if we can lay out a vision that people are excited about and inspired by. And I believe that in this campaign, I have laid out both specific steps that help people all over the state, especially in Western Massachusetts, and that I also have laid out a bold, progressive agenda. And I just want to point at something out. I like both of my colleagues. There is a phrase that they have not brought up ever, which is corporate power. We are being governed increasingly in this country and being screwed, frankly, by big pharma, by big banks, by big airlines, by big internet companies who are sacrificing our interests in order to increase the wealth of people who already have a lot of it. And so one of the things is we have to ask, in thinking about a choice, are we going to continue down that path? Or are we going to shift to more local economy, no more democratic economy, all things that are entirely possible and that in fact are part of the American tradition? Now, I want to say that Charlie Baker is performing a kind of negative Jedi mind trick. And the question is whether we're going to fall for it. As he said, I'm very popular, I have a lot of money, and I'm very tall. Therefore, I'm going to win. Now, if we listen to that, we're going to lose. And there are plenty of people who are caught up in the mind trick, and we need to help wake them up. But let me just point out a couple of important points. That first of all, Charlie Baker won by the smallest margin in the history of Massachusetts. He won with 1.1 million votes. Elizabeth Warren, who is also up for re-election, won with 1.7 million votes. That means there are 600,000 people out there who can be, we hope, will step in and participate. If they do, if you invite your friends, we can have that impact, because that is the tradition in Massachusetts. Someone mentioned, why do we have Republican governors? Very late primaries, a lot of secret money flowing around, and a killing of our clean elections by a Democratic legislature. Public funding was killed by the Democratic legislature 15 or 20 years ago. So let me just point out, we have seen governors win in New Jersey. We have seen governors win in Virginia. And we have seen a senator win in Alabama. And the way I view as, and I just want to say, I think it was very nice of the organizers of this to have Charlie Baker represented up here in the form of a potted plant. But if a Democrat can win in Alabama, then I think a Democrat can win in Massachusetts.
All right, thank you, gentlemen. Next, we'll take a series of questions from the audience. I'm told that we had a great many questions, so we only selected 8 of them to read here because our time is limited, unfortunately. But thank you all for your very thoughtful questions. Remember now that candidates only have 2 minutes to answer. Some questions may be directed at 1 or 2 candidates, but each will have a chance to respond, and I don't think that's actually the case here. I think they're all for all of you. So question number 1, we're going to start off with Mr. Massey. Given the attack on net neutrality, what will you do to bring fast, affordable internet to the hill towns and passenger rail along the Route 2 corridor?
Well, I am so glad you asked this question, because one of the things that is key to the development of Western Massachusetts is investment in the infrastructure, which will allow us to halt the departure of young people and make it possible for new businesses to either come here or to be here. And I tell you something, I did not understand when I first started coming out here last spring just how deep the inequity is. I mean, honestly, one of the first meetings I went to was in Northampton. People brought up the question of internet, and I said, wow, is that still a problem out here? And I got this huge shout, yes! Now that's really shocking. I mean, think about it. It's, at this point, having access to the internet is an essential component. So what we need to do is, first of all, we need to put pressure to speed up the completion of the last mile. I don't understand why that hasn't been done. I also think we need to consider creating more, not only municipal power companies, but municipally controlled internet companies, which we can do. I was just on that point. I was at Holyoke Gas and Electric. They provide internet for commercial internet there under local control. So that's an important thing. Transportation is the key. Every other major industrial society has built transportation systems to meet the 21st century. The Chinese have invested so that they now have 15,000 kilometers of high-speed rail. You know how many we have in the United States? 0. And so we need not only, and you know, I'll tell you something, we're having an impact on the governor, because I've been saying for 8 months we need a long-term transportation plan that solves the problem for the whole state, and including east-west, so that we can go from Boston to Worcester to Springfield, out across here and all the way to Albany. And you know what? 2 days ago, Karen Polito announced that they were going to form a commission to look at the possibility of a 10-year plan for this. That's study and stall. That's what this governor does. That's the potted plant. That's why we need to have a forceful governor.
Thank you, Mr. Massey.
To move things forward.
And next, Mr. Gonzalez. And if you need me to repeat the questions, please let me know.
No, that's all right. So let's just be clear about the fact, Bob referenced this, Western Mass has been shafted for a very long time when it comes to getting your fair share of infrastructure investment. Broad access to broadband and high-speed internet, it is totally unacceptable that is not in place now. We started the initiative under the Patrick administration. I was a part of the broadband initiative to begin to wire everybody across western Massachusetts and other parts of the state that weren't served. I can't believe it's not done yet. It needs to get done. High-speed rail from Springfield, extending the Route 2 rail. We need to be thinking about these transformational transportation investments that can make a meaningful difference from an economic development perspective, a quality of life perspective for people in western Massachusetts. We also need to do the basics, fixing the roads and bridges. I will say I'm the only candidate in this race that's actually had a leadership experience in state government, being in charge of some of this stuff, and actually turning the tide on some of it. I mentioned in my opening remarks a number of investments that I authorized right here in Greenfield. The Garden Theater renovation, when that renewal project started in 2012. The courthouse, the $60 million courthouse project. I developed the financing program for the Accelerated Bridge Program. Even during the Great Recession, very tough times for the state. We figured out a way, creatively, to come up with a $3 billion program to start to turn the tide on structurally deficient bridges all across this state, including in Western Mass, that had been neglected for decades thanks to Charlie Baker's Big Dig finance plan that sucked all the resources out of every other part of the state to cover the cost overruns on the Big Dig. I've been there. I figured out how to provide financing in order to move forward on important projects here in western Massachusetts. And as your governor, I'll be honest about the fact we need additional revenue to do so, and I'll build on that experience to make sure we're continuing to make investments here.
Thank you, Mr. Gonzalez. Mr. Warren?
So I've been to Western Mass many times over the last several months. I've heard from residents, I've heard from businesses, I've heard from people that commute, I've heard from people that don't commute. It is absolutely essential that we have a solid internet broadband infrastructure here. We cannot go another day without making these investments. There's no question. The economy of Western Mass, whether you're a sole proprietor, whether you're a business with multiple people, whether you're Representative Mark, who doesn't have internet service, we have to make sure we do it. We have to do it now. Transportation is essential. And we know that there is an unequal system of investment in Western Massachusetts. We know that. I believe in east-west rail. I also believe very strongly in the north-south knowledge corridor. Governor Patrick worked with President Obama to attain funding to begin to invest in this infrastructure north-south. There's been a lot of talk since then and no action. It is unacceptable. We need to make those investments so that everyone in Western Massachusetts has a fair chance. I'm committed to doing that as your governor.
Thank you. Our next question goes first to Mr. Gonzalez. What do you think is the role of unions today in the public and private sector, and how will you work to help the nurses of Franklin Medical Center get a fair contract?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear the beginning of the question.
What do you think is the role of unions today in the public and private sector, and how will you help the nurses at Franklin Medical Center get a fair contract?
So I think we need unions now more than ever. As Secretary of Administration and Finance, I actually, in that role, I was technically the employer for the executive branch of state government. The governor isn't, oddly. And so I was responsible for all collective bargaining and labor relations with the state's employee unions. And I had that job during the Great Recession, when we had lots of pressures, and I was responsible for managing the state budget, worst fiscal crisis the state had faced in decades, lots of pressures to find cost savings. And we had to make a lot of hard decisions. But it was my first experience dealing in a labor relations context, and I gained a great appreciation and respect for the collective bargaining process. It forced me and management to sit down and listen and talk with our representatives of our state employees and to understand their interests and to work with them collaboratively to figure out a way forward that worked in the best interests of the people of Commonwealth while also recognizing the interests of our employees. And so I appreciated that process. And I think if you ask our state employee union heads, they would say that I was someone who listened and operated in good faith and worked with them to get positive outcomes. That is the approach I would take as governor. When it comes to M&A and contract negotiations with certain hospitals, one was just consummated at Tufts Medical Center in Boston. I did go and walk the picket line with the nurses in Boston when they were picketing for a 5-day period. And I do believe that we need unions to be strong so that we end up getting to the best outcome for the organization.
Thank you. And next, that goes to Mr. Massey.
I would like to point out that my friend Jay's wording was interesting here, because he said that engaging with unions forced him to listen to their concerns. I don't have to be forced. I have worked with unions. I'm a member of a union. My wife is the secretary of her union. I believe that unions are fundamental to our democracy and our economy because they are one of the only forms of real countervailing power against those who want to depress wages in seek of greater profits. I also want to say that specifically to nurses, here is a really good example. Nurses can be portrayed, oh, well, maybe they just want higher pay. No, this fight is about patient safety. And I can tell you, having been a patient, I went through my experiences with hemophilia and other medical challenges, which I just want to reassure you are completely gone. But I owe my own life and my own healing to many nurses over time. And I have experienced what it is when nurses have time to take care of you and when they don't. And as the various companies are seeking a way to suppress their wages, they don't suppress their own pay, by the way. The executives don't lower that. They want to lower the pay or freeze the pay or to increase the workload. So I believe that unions are essential. I also want to say unions need to evolve. We do not have the same economy that allows for massive collective bargaining between major industries and major unions. We have a much more dispersed economy. We have to think about new ways. There's a wonderful group called the Freelancers Union that has risen up for people in the gig economy. There are mechanisms for moving this forward. But I believe I would be the strongest supporter of working people and labor in governor's role for a long time. And I am deeply committed to moving forward on those core issues. I've also walked picket lines my whole career. This isn't a late conversion to progressive issues. It is what I've done for my whole life.
Thank you, Mr. Massey. That is time.
Mr.
Warren.
I'm going to channel my cousin Elizabeth Warren on this answer a little bit. I kind of joked around, if I'm the nominee, we could do Warren and Warren, at the... look, Warren, yeah, sure. Look, over 40 or 50 years, the dismantling of public unions and built in unions and corporations has been a driver for the growth of economic inequality in this country. There is no question. What we've got to do right now is shine a light on that and be honest about the fact that we need strong public unions and private unions to ensure that the next generation people in this state have a fighting chance to make a living. There is no question. On the municipal side, in my 8 years as mayor, when I came in as mayor, there were 17 unions, public unions in my city. All those contracts were up. I sat down in a budget crisis and we worked collaboratively. We put in place good, solid health care and benefits packages within our city to protect our people, as well as ensure we had financial sustainable pathway, and I did it again on a second round. In addition to that, we built all those public schools with union labor that I talked about in Newton. I was proud of the fact that we ensured we had union participation, strong union participation in building those, and I wasn't afraid to intervene. when unions ask for my help in the city of Newton, like SEIU with issues outside of the city. And I would do the same thing. If I'm governor, I'm going to be standing with those nurses, and we're going to sit down and figure out how to protect them. The same way I did in the city of Newton for our union. So I believe, and by the way, folks, keep an eye on this Supreme Court decision coming down in the next few months. This is where state and local government is important. We need a governor that's going to protect the people of our state and our unions. So as I said, our folks have a fighting chance.
Thank you. That's time. And you get to continue because you're first for our next question. We had 11 questions on energy and the environment, and a summary of the major concerns. People want you to please explain your position on offshore oil drilling, offshore wind, biomass, and the climate challenge in general.
Climate challenge?
Sorry.
You say?
The climate
Offshore
crisis.
oil drilling,
Yeah.
offshore wind, biomass, and the climate challenge in general.
Climate challenge in general. The climate challenge, I want to make sure I'm
I
answering.
think they mean climate change.
Change. Climate change. Okay.
Crisis, call it what you
Okay.
want.
Tell us about the environment.
Okay. Look, just to tick these through, we really, we have to move away from fossil fuels. This is why I'm against the infrastructure of these gas pipelines. We need to stop those. Offshore drilling, we need to stop what we're doing there. I do not believe the answer to working our way towards renewable energy lies within burning wood and biomass. I believe it lies within investing in solar and wind. I do support offshore wind. I believe it makes a lot of sense. One of the places where I've seen some investment was under the Patrick administration, putting real investment in New Bedford. There's real opportunity to build offshore wind so that we can actually promote this as opposed to slowing it down as Governor Baker is doing. Look, I think that it would be safe to say that on this stage you have three people that would be working in the exact opposite direction of this governor. There's no question Charlie Baker is promoting fossil fuels by trying to kill the solar program twice, which I fought him against, by slowing down offshore wind. We need a different way. If we're going to meet these targets, if we're going to address climate change in our state, and also address economic inequality, because I believe that when we address climate change, we can also address social justice and economic inequality.
Thank you. And Mr. Massey, please.
The opportunities here are immense, but the dangers are also immense. And I have been working on this, as I've said, since the late 1980s. I'll tell you that originally when we started this race, there was not as much conversation from my colleagues about this issue. Partly because when you poll people, it often does not show up initially as an immediate concern, but it is a deep concern in most people's lives as they look ahead. And it should be, because we saw what happened in the flooding, and we also can see what an enormous economic opportunity that we have. Now, let's just point out how drastic this is. We have an Interior Department secretary who has opened up all of our reserves to drilling, and that will sign contracts that will be very hard to break everywhere, every part of our waters, north, south, east, west. That's extremely dangerous and foolish because it drags us backwards. We have the opportunity to create the greatest offshore wind collection anywhere in the United States. Some people have said we could be the Saudi Arabia of wind, and I agree. Biomass is not the way to go because even though it's, quote, renewable, it creates pollution. It is not a great source. But overall, we need to have the courage to wake up and address this with urgency and to demand from our legislature that they move forward on many, many good ideas that have come up there. But mostly, we need to replace this governor who is coddling Trump, not standing up to his many, many different actions, which I hope we have a little more time to talk about, but this is a moment of truth in the history of the United States, and we need you to, I'm glad there were 11 questions, because it shows that people are passionate about this, that they care about this, and if you want someone who understands this inside and out, who has already committed more than 30 years of his career, I hope that you'll consider supporting me so we can work together to make decisive structural change.
Thank you. And Mr. Gonzalez?
So yes on offshore wind as aggressively as we can, no on biomass for the reasons stated. I think part of the question was oil drilling off of our coast, which our president has just opened up the possibility of. I don't think we've heard a peep from Governor Baker on this. I haven't read anything. We should be fighting vociferously against this. I think Senator Markey has been speaking up against this, thankfully. But that is exactly the wrong direction, just like everything else President Trump is doing in this area, pulling back from our moving full speed ahead under President Obama to actually do something about climate change. And this is yet another area where you really need to look at the difference between what Governor Baker says and what he does. You know, he got a lot of credit for criticizing President Trump for pulling out of the Paris Accord, the climate agreement, the international climate agreement. But right here at home, he doesn't say anything about President Trump's repeal of all these regulations that President Obama put in place. He doesn't say anything about the possibility of offshore oil drilling happening off of our coast and coasts up and down the United States of America. He is slow-walking the transition to renewable energy sources. He's appointing people who are in the fossil fuel industry to oversee all of this. My understanding is he had the opportunity, you know, we've got this regional greenhouse gas initiative that's been in place for a number of years. It's been very successful in reducing emissions from power plants. Transportation now is the biggest emitting sector. My understanding is a number of our states in this region wanted to form a pact to work together to take a similar approach to addressing emissions in the transportation sector, and Governor Baker wouldn't sign on to that. We need leadership. This is one of many examples where we have a governor who is way too satisfied with the status quo. We have big challenges we need to take on, like climate change, and we need a governor who's going to do it.
Thank you. That's time. Mr. Massey, are you willing to go beyond colorblindness and talk openly about race and racial justice? How will you help eliminate the disproportionate burdens borne by people of color with regard to criminal justice, education, and employment in Massachusetts?
As I've mentioned, I have been committed to working on racial justice from early in my adulthood. I trace this partly because of my own experience of being excluded on the basis of my appearance as a boy with leg braces. I'm not saying that's comparable in any direct form to the experience of racial discrimination, but it has given me an insight in what it is to be excluded before you even open your mouth. We have deep problems with structural and institutional racism in this state, and I have been talking about that. I have been fighting for that for a very long time. One of the things that I would do as governor, governors have a wonderful opportunity to put the spotlight on core problems. I would invite us to spend a month as a state through our local institutions, our religious institutions, our community institutions, to have conversations about race and to bring those questions to the front and not be afraid to talk about this legacy of injustice and the continued barriers that people have to opportunity. So this is a core question. And I just want to use this moment. There's some other related issues. We also need to tackle issues that face women and gender pay equity. I'm sorry that question hasn't come up, but I have also worked on that question. There are many forms of exclusion. So working on questions related to many excluded communities, that's something a governor must do. The elite can take care of itself. They have plenty of money and they know what to do to pursue their own interests. A governor should be standing up for working people, for families, for people who have been systematically included, and that means having a close personal commitment and a willingness, the political courage to bring this up relentlessly. And I believe that that's something that we all need and we agree with, and something that remains to be done that I would do as governor. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Warren?
Look, you know, I mentioned I'm a third-generation combat veteran. My grandfather was a veteran of the Battle of the Bulge, World War II. He came home to a segregated city and was not able to take advantage of the suburban household purchases that many of the white GAs came home. My dad came home from Korea and went down south and faced Jim Crow laws, risked his life. We have made a tremendous amount of progress. I know that. But we have a long way to go. We know there are inequities. We know that the criminal justice system is in many ways unequal. We know that the housing system and transportation systems we have are very unequal. And we know that access to higher paying jobs are unequal. I will set specific metrics within these areas, as well as healthcare, to make sure we are making progress, and I will make them transparent to all of you over the course of my years as governor of this state, so that we're meeting those. But more importantly, or in addition to those metrics, one of the quick stories I want to share with you. I was in Winchendon, Massachusetts. Everyone know Winchendon? This is a tough town. It's been hit by a changing economy. I visited there. The owner of Hometown Diner, sat with him. This is a town that is white. I heard of the stories of opioid addiction. I heard stories of lack of job opportunity. Then I'm in Dudley Square in Roxbury a week later. Black audience hearing the same thing. I told both of these audiences, we need to work together. We need to work together. The folks in Dudley, then I was out in Western Massachusetts and hearing the same stories, and down on the Cape. I pledge to you, I will bring the people of this state together so we can face this together and make sure we're all held accountable to making a difference, not just within the black community, but in every community across the Commonwealth.
Thank you, Mr. Warren. And Mr. Gonzalez?
Yeah, racial disparities are a huge problem. They continue to be. And we have made a lot of progress, but as the Globe Spotlight series pointed out, and we all know, not just Bob, but all of us know that they continue to exist, but the Spotlight series was very powerful in terms of a number of specific examples recently, and facts and data that they did a lot of research to pull out, which really demonstrates what I think in a very powerful way we all know, which is we have a long way to go. And we have been tolerating as a society and a culture something that we should not be, and that we need a conscious, focused effort to address. And there are a number of different areas where the racial disparities are manifested, some of which were mentioned in the question. One I want to speak to, which is our criminal justice system, where there are huge disparities, racial disparities on the impacts of our criminal justice system over the last few decades on people of color. And we literally have been tearing communities apart as a result. We need a criminal justice system, in my view, that is focused much more on addressing the underlying causes of crime, mental health treatment, addiction treatment, access to jobs, access to a good education, addressing poverty and the core issues that result in motivating people to commit crimes and to go to crime. We need to be investing much more in diversionary programs. We need to be investing much more in programming for people who are in jail so they're successful when they get out. We need to eliminate all mandatory minimum sentences except for murder. I think we need to reform our system of fees and fines. I proposed eliminating cash bail. I saw that Governor Cuomo in New York just followed my lead yesterday. So there's a lot we need to do to stop jailing people just because they're poor, and give people the opportunities to not end up in the criminal justice system in the first place and to be successful when they get out. We're jailing way too many for way too long at too high a cost.
Thank you. That's time. And we have 2 more questions left. Our next question goes to Mr. Warren. Please state your position on the Citizens United decision. What is its impact on Massachusetts campaign financing? And will you accept donations from large corporations and PACs?
I will not accept donations from corporations. I issued a challenge to all my opponents in this race, do the same, as well as accept dark money. Citizens United has been disastrous for this country. and for the state of Massachusetts. It's been absolutely disastrous. We need, if I think we talked a little bit about this earlier, we absolutely, I would love to see a public financing law in place here in the state of Massachusetts that would enable us to not have this kind of influence that we see. I want to just go beyond that. You know, one of the areas that I think is that I focus on, I've talked about this, in addition to raising revenue, which we need to do with the millionaire's tax, I would also take a real lens to some of the tax exemptions and loopholes we have in our state budget, which give away billions of dollars to special interests, some of which have nothing to do with addressing the needs of the people of this state. Representative Jake Hoffman has worked very hard on this and has proposed having a third-party commission review these 400 some odd tax exemptions to make sure we know exactly where and how this money is affecting our state or not, and the people of this state. So in addition to campaign finance reform, I'd also like to follow Jake Hoffman's lead in really looking at these tax exemptions that have an effect on our budget.
Thank you. And Mr. Gonzalez?
So I think I'm the only candidate that's put out a campaign finance reform proposal. I was the first candidate, I think maybe in the country, if not the state, to take American Promises, an organization's pledge as governor to support a constitutional amendment to get rid of to overturn the Citizens United decision, which we need to do. I also propose a number of other reforms to campaign finance laws, and many of which were motivated by what Governor Baker is doing to violate the intent and spirit of our campaign finance laws here in Massachusetts. Representative Mark referenced the fact that he seems to be the only candidate in the country, apparently, who's figured out a way to funnel $43,000 donations. The limit in Massachusetts is $1,000 per individual per year. $43,000 donations that go up to the National Republican Party, which uses part of it to support people like Roy Moore in Alabama, and comes back down, a bunch of it comes back down for his benefit. This is totally inconsistent with the spirit of our campaign finance laws. Wealthy donors giving him huge donations and making him more easily influenced by them. An even bigger problem, Bob referenced this earlier, the charter school ballot campaign. It is disgusting what he and his team were up to with respect to that campaign. They raised $25–30 million. There are two now shell organizations that have been fined, one of which the highest campaign finance fine in state history, because it was basically acting as a political money laundering operation for Charlie Baker's charter school ballot campaign. I went to a state board of education meeting to confront the chair who was a part of it and Secretary Pizer and ask them to be open and transparent with the people of Massachusetts about what their role is in this. I also asked for an investigation by the Attorney General and Inspector General of Charlie Baker's role in this and whether he was actively soliciting huge undisclosed donations, some in the amount of $2 million per person, and funneling them through these organizations that were operating illegally.
Thank you, Mr.
We need to
Gonzalez.
crack down on this.
And Mr. Massey?
Citizens United is part of a larger problem of the corruption of democracy by money. And that corruption affects all of us, and it even affects the three of us up here. When I began running for governor, I was told by many people, including my advisors, national advisors and local advisors, that I should spend a minimum of 30 hours a week calling rich people and asking them for money. Now, because of my background as a minister, an activist, a teacher, none of which is a very high-paying profession, I don't have that circle. And although I respect my colleagues here, they have had to be part of this. And if you go to the Office of Campaign and Political Finance, you will see that a great amount of money, and I think particularly these gentlemen, comes from people giving $1,000 donations. That is a problem because it forces our attention on the wealthy. It forces us to spend time talking to the wealthy and not campaigning. Now, if I have less money, it's partly because I have smaller contributions from more people and people who are committed. So I just want to say this is a deep problem. I think that I have the standing and the commitment to really attack it. I supported clean elections 20 years ago, fought for that. I was horrified when it was killed by the Democratic Party, and we need to go back to that. And I just want to say, additionally, as this is part of the larger question of the rich and the powerful and the corporate interests imposing their will on democracy. And as I said, this has been a concern from the beginning. George Washington was concerned about it. The Roosevelts and even Dwight Eisenhower talked about the military-industrial complex. They would be horrified to see what has happened today. And we need to depend on people power and on our revolution, broadly construed, to turn this around and restore democracy to the people.
Thank you. And our final question, we will start with Mr. Gonzalez. Please state your position on criminal justice reform and eliminating cash bail.
So you've already heard that from me. And you can go to my, so I said a lot about what I think we need to do on criminal justice reform. You can go to my website. There's an entire proposal on my website which lays all this out in great detail, and I'd encourage you to do so. There are a lot of other policy proposals on my website I'd encourage you to go look at also. A couple things I might react to that my colleagues had mentioned. On the more donations point, I'm very proud of the way in which we have raised money for this campaign. I agree it is terrible, the amount of time we need to spend trying to raise money to be able to build the robust grassroots campaign we need to. I wish we didn't. But at the same time, I've approached it in a very grassroots-like way. And we actually have more donations than any other candidate in this race since I got into this race and since others did. So I'm proud of the fact that we, from a grassroots perspective, have gotten more donations, including one from a guy who every month gives me $5, which I'm very proud of. Mayor Warren mentioned the fact, and I agree, that we need to, when we were talking about campaign finance reform, we also need to be looking at corporate giveaways of tax breaks to corporations and whether or not they're actually delivering on what they were expected to deliver for those taxpayer subsidies, and if they aren't, taking them away and using that money to invest in areas that we need to invest. He referenced Chairman Kaufman. All the proposals Chairman Kaufman has put out were done in cooperation and collaboration with me when I was in state government. We co-chaired a commission that came up with all these recommendations. Other states have copied them. Governor Baker has not picked up all of our recommendations and isn't doing anything about them. So I agree with Mayor Warren on that, and that's an area where I actually, when I was in state government, provided leadership to begin working on that.
Thank you. And Mr. Massey?
Criminal justice has been a problem addressing the core issues since the beginning of our nation. We go through periods when we become, as a society, very punitive, and we want to have mandatory minimums. We want to punish and harm our prisoners. Fortunately, from time to time, we go through a period when we say that's ridiculous, it is counterproductive, it makes certain, or virtually certain, that anyone who goes through our system ends up reoffending when they get out. Fortunately, we now have a moment when our legislature has passed in the different houses a criminal justice reform that in one proposal ends mandatory minimums, that eliminates or reduces solitary confinement, which has been defined internationally as a form of torture and that we have been using to excess. And we have to look even more deeply at the way in which, as has been said, that many times people are being jailed because they're poor. We have a racially driven school to jail pipeline that needs to be ended. This is a long-term task where we have to be reminded that this is about corrections. This is about rehabilitation. This is about not just spending money on arresting people and putting them in prison, but helping them make the transition back so that they are no longer offenders and they can, having served their time, be productive members of society. That was the goal in the 19th century, when when we had prison reform. And now we need to do that again. But we have to be conscious that is part of a larger problem, like the opioid epidemic, where people become so desperate and so concerned they end up committing infractions, and then we hammer them to the point where they have no chance of coming back. So that is a fundamental responsibility of the governor to lay out that passage to restoration. And I'm glad that we're in that place now, but it needs to be driven to implementation when that legislation passes.
Thank you. And Mr. Warren.
Sure, I want to talk about criminal justice. Just make sure that people have the right information out there. The average dollar contribution level to my campaign is $260. It's not $1,000, Bob, just so you know. But on criminal justice, and I'm really proud of the folks that have contributed in small amounts to me over time, over this last several months since I've been in this campaign. Criminal justice, it's one of the driving issues around economic inequality, the growth of economic inequality. Yes, we need to revise the cash bail system. We also need to make sure we have solid diversion programs in our court system. Our courts need to be diverting people that need assistance, help, whether it's mental health, substance abuse, or otherwise, and not getting them within the criminal justice system, within the incarceration. I've talked to people who are incarcerated. We need to make sure that people are being ready for reentry inside of jails. I know Sheriff Tompkins is doing a lot of work on this, Sheriff Katusian, on getting people prepared for reentry. And then when people do reenter, we need to make sure they have not just a parole officer, but connectivity to jobs, housing, and transportation. This is how we're going to revise what we're doing and not have a revolving door of recidivism, because that's what we continue to do if we don't put these measures in place. There are some great programs that work with young people, in particular, young adults, UTEP and Lowell, who actually give people jobs who come right out of the criminal justice system and set them up with the architecture that I'm talking about. We need to scale that up.
Thank you. And thank you to all of our candidates. So those are all of the questions that we have time for tonight. But now I'd like to offer each of you 2 minutes for closing remarks, after which Mary Ellen will offer brief closing comments. Thank you once again for joining us here in Franklin County as we prepare for what promises to be an exciting election year in Massachusetts. Now, to start off our closing comments, Mr. Seti Warren.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I am so inspired by this crowd. It's unbelievable, the numbers and the intellect. Thank yourselves. Thank you. Look, I believe this election is about choices. And I also believe if we start organizing now on the ground and turn people out, we will win. There are choices. We do not have to accept Charlie Baker's status quo around this opioid crisis. Charlie Baker is on a panel appointed by President Trump, run by Kellyanne Conway. This group of people declared a state of emergency on the opioid crisis and didn't provide any resources. He's doing the same thing in Massachusetts. 5 people are dying a day, 250,000 people in our state living with addiction at a cost of $10 billion a year. We should not accept that status quo. We should not accept a status quo of inadequate, under-resourced transportation in Western Massachusetts. It is wrong. We need to have the courage to say, yes, we need to pass the Fair Share Tax Amendment and make sure people making $1 million a year or more will reinvest that in education and transportation and infrastructure. We should not accept Charlie Baker's status quo when he says that he's for criminal justice reform and he puts forth a mandatory minimum bill in August for nonviolent drug offenders. We should not accept this. There is a way we can do something about it. As I mentioned, that student at UMass Lowell, if we get out and organize like heck on the ground, turn people out, we will, and tell the truth, we will win. And by the way, folks, we got some great candidates up here. If you decide not to support me, support one of these 2 gentlemen right now so we can get to work, because we're all going to be together in beating Charlie Baker next year. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And next, we'll hear from Mr. Massey.
Well, I want to thank you. I mean, it is extraordinary that we have spent nearly 2 hours talking about politics, and that's really a testimony to you. And even though we spent 2 hours, I just want to say there are some topics we didn't fully explore. We should talk about the future of farming in Western Massachusetts. We should spend more time, which we could be building up through CSAs, through local contracts, through many, many things. We can talk about that in the hallway afterwards. Also, we didn't spend enough time on women's issues. One of the things I want to let you know is that after one of a previous race, I took the money that I had left over and I gave it to Emerge, because I was very conscious that Paul Mark kept referring to the 3 men up here. So we need to support women in all aspects of leadership. And then I want to say, this election is not really all about us. It's about you. It's what kind of imagination, what kind of desire, what kind of dreams do you have for this state? We've absorbed this Republican culture of scarcity. I'm sorry, we don't have enough money, you can't do it, just give up and settle for what we give you. That's ridiculous. The tradition in Massachusetts has been to dream boldly, to imagine the future, to set goals that we don't know how to achieve at the beginning, but we work it out. We have a culture actually of abundance. If all of us come together, we have more resources, more training, more education, more people, and actually more money than ever before. So I just want to say, this election is about what you believe is possible and who you think among us will be able to move forward those bold dreams. It takes persistence. And one of my American heroes is Susan B. Anthony, born here in 1820, who spent 85 years fighting for women's right to vote and died before the end. Just want to finish with Edward Kennedy's quote. He said, "Taking on great challenges is what we do as Americans. I know it, I've lived it, I've seen it, and we can do it again." That's the theme of this election, and I invite you to join us to make that happen.
Thank you. And finally, Mr. Gonzalez.
Thank you. I want to thank the hosts for putting this on. Our great moderator, should we give her a round of applause? And our timekeeper, yes. And all of you for being here. It matters to show up to stuff like this, right? And so your being here and sitting through this and engaging in the way you have gives me a lot of hope and optimism. I also want to thank my 2 colleagues who we've had the pleasure of getting to know each other pretty well over the last few months. And they're both great people. If either one of them ends up winning the Democratic nomination, I will be there 100% supporting them, because they will be a hell of a lot better governor than Charlie Baker. But I am asking for your support. And we talked a lot today about a lot of issues. I hope you got a sense, and I encourage you again to go to my website to learn more, that I am trying to offer an ambitious, progressive agenda to make a difference in people's lives in a way that they feel on a day-to-day basis, and to stand up for every single person in this state. That is why I'm running. And I bring the leadership experience from the public and private sectors to deliver on it. One differentiator, I'm the only candidate in this race who has leadership experience in state government, getting big things done. When I served as Governor Patrick's Secretary of Administration and Finance, I not only oversaw the state budget and a bunch of other stuff within my bailiwick, I often was his point person for negotiating a lot of the big reform legislation we got through the legislature during that time and with other stakeholders. I know how the process works. I've worked successfully through it before. We all want to get a lot accomplished with a Democratic governor. I'm somebody who's actually been there and delivered on an ambitious agenda, and I am anxious to do it again with your help and support. Thank you very much.
I promise to hire these 2 guys if I win.
Thank you so much. On behalf of FCCPR, I want to thank you once again, the candidates Gonzalez, Massey, and Warren, for participating in today's forum. I also want to thank the members of the audience for their participation, offering some really compelling questions. Sorry we couldn't get to all of them for our candidates to respond to. Thank you, Sheila Gilmore, for moderating. I failed to mention our own Susan Triolo, too, as a timekeeper. Thank you. And Otis Wheeler, somewhere up in the balcony there. He's also one of FCCPR's endorsement success stories. Otis was newly elected to the Greenfield City Council as well. Give a wave. And Otis is filming and live streaming today's event. Thank you to Paul Mark for your remarks today and for your loyalty to your constituents and to progressive causes. Thank you to Greenfield Public Schools, Superintendent Harper, Custodian Pete and Joel, and stage staff Andrew, for opening your doors and providing the assistance we need to make this event a success. Soon our candidate, sorry, give him a hand, give him a hand. Soon our candidate recommendation committee will meet to decide whether or not to recommend an endorsement of any of the candidates to FCCPR's membership. FCCPR takes our endorsement process very seriously, as our endorsement doesn't simply end with a declaration of support. Members of FCCPR volunteer their time and energy, ensuring that whoever we endorse wins. During this past municipal election, for example, FCCPR members volunteered countless hours creating and maintaining voter lists, knocking on doors, organizing and participating in phone banks during both the persuasion phase and the get out the vote periods. Our successes during these elections is evidence that when we organize, we can win. Of course, all of our candidates will be notified should FCCPR decide to make an endorsement. Before I close today, I want to acknowledge the presence of another candidate, Tahira Amatul Wadud. You stand. Tahira is running in the 1st Congressional District, a seat currently held by Congressman Richie Neal. Tahira is in the audience today, and she gave a little wave, but she's going to wait a little bit at the end. If you have questions for her, feel free to ask. We also encourage you to attend an FCCPR-endorsed event for Tahira on Sunday, January 28th, 2 p.m. at the Fellowship Hall in Shelburne. That information's in your agenda as well. Thank you all again for coming, and stay warm. Thank you. Thank you.